So you mentioned you've got a great history.
Yes.
A great Jewish history, and family has come from Spain under the radar for 200 years. That means that they actually kept their Judaism for 200 years, and it wasn't an easy time to keep Judaism at all. And then they popped up in England. Mendoza is a very big family. It's doing very well. You have grown up with the desire to give back to society, but also to stand up proudly for your Jewish values.
So I don't think there's any consistency. The point is, there's not a fight between these two issues. If you like, my political perspectives, my values-based perspectives, and my Jewish perspectives all align. There is no fight between them. It's not as if I'm going, Jewishly I'm thinking this, but Britishly I'm thinking that. How do I reconcile the two? I think the reality is, if you look at Britain as a society, it is based fundamentally on Judeo-Christian values. That is the basis of what we have as a nation transform them into modern day societies. I think we have a very good example, and in much of the West the same is true as well, but Britain I think has been a particularly good example because it hasn't been aggressive about it. The British way has always been, we get along with each other, we have a certain sense of this or that. We don't tend to ram it down your throat because that's not how it works.
Dr. Alan Mendoza, it's a pleasure to have you on Lessons for Life. You are a British political analyst as well as media commentator, and you are somebody that is really having a big influence in the community here in Britain. We want to share some great stories, some great ideas to our listeners. So welcome to Lessons for Life.
Thank you very much. Well, a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing, a little bit about the upbringing and what led you into this sphere of work that you're doing currently.
Well, of course, it's a total accident how you end up in your sort of profession, but we'll come to that later. The upbringing, though, is interesting because it has a relevance to what I do in different ways. So if we look at it slightly from a change perspective, I grew up in the 1980s, 1990s in London. And as you can tell by my family name, it's an old Sephardic family in the UK. So I was always conscious from a very early age that we had been here a long time, very long time for British, sort of Jews in that way. Not so long maybe for, for other people, but it meant that we had a different perspective because we could trace our family back to the early 18th century.
Wow.
Which is interesting. We've actually got a family tree, which
previously was Spain, Portugal?
It's Spain. So interesting, the family came clearly as crypto Jews straight from Spain to London. They didn't go via Amsterdam, which many Jews did. They came straight here because the community had been re-established, and obviously those ties were there, and presumably had to sort of re-go, whatever, just to understand what was happening again. But they settled as with many others, and it's amazing to think that for 200 years, essentially, Jews lived secretly in Spain under the Inquisition. How they did, God only knows, but they lived there and maintained their traditions somehow, and when the opportunity existed to re-emerge, they re-emerged, which is a fascinating story. In London. Now, the next bit is to know about my family history, which is important, is that we've got some very interesting relatives. The first famous sporting Jew in the world, okay, and there aren't that many, let's be realistic, but the first famous one was a boxer called Daniel Mendoza, of course, late 18th century, champion of England and Ireland. But it's interesting because he was essentially, I suppose, the first Jew in the UK who came to public prominence in anything other than the literary sense. Obviously, we had Shylock. That was not a good example. But Daniel Mendoza, or Mendoza the Jew, as he was known, gave a different impression, a noble Jew fighting in the ring. And he brought science to boxing, which is interesting as well.
Was he a winner?
He was a winner. He won the championship. He was at one point friends with the Prince of Wales. Unfortunately, didn't end well for him. He ended up in a debtor's prison. But
okay.
That's slightly different. But for a while, he had boxing gyms. It was quite.
He's related to you as
yes.
Your ancestor.
He's an ancestor. He's a great uncle. So he's won a lot. We're from the next branch down. But you can get a sense the family's large. And other interesting family members who are connected. Peter Sellers, the actor. So he's got a Mendoza link. And interestingly, Rufus Isaacs, who was the Marquis of Reading, the only Jewish Viceroy of India, a Jewish Foreign Secretary, Attorney General, Ambassador to the USA, has also got a Mendoza link. So but these are all very disparate on the family. So we grew up with this idea of obviously having been well settled in Britain. Britain was our home, is our home. My mother actually was from Finland and was actually a convert to Judaism.
Oh, wow.
So a slightly different approach in there. But I think that set the tone because my father's family hadn't been particularly religious in any way. But when my mother converted, it sort of struck something in my father, I think. And so we actually grew up in what might be termed a modern Orthodox environment in that sort of way. And so we were very engaged with the Spanish Portuguese synagogue in Wembley, where we grew up. And that sort of formed the basis for going forward, immersion in a community. So I was very involved at a very young age in a community, in a historic community that my family had great roots in as well. And that sort of, kind of set the scene for my sort of background involvement. I went to sort of to Cambridge to study things. I did a PhD. And it was very interesting at that point to work out what I would do next. I dabbled in publishing for a bit, but actually what interested me were ideas. And what I really wanted to do was to see, was there a way that you could marry this background of sort of involvement in Britain with a values base as well about what your family believed in and other things, and how could you tie that into a broader perspective?
Is it difficult being Jewish and coming from a Jewish perspective, but at the same time being patriotic in the country that you live, Britain? How does that work? So you mentioned you've got a great history.
Yes.
A great Jewish history, and something which really people are envious of. Your family has come from Spain under the radar for 200 years. That meant that they actually kept their Judaism for 200 years, and it wasn't an easy time to keep Judaism at all. And then they popped up in England. Mendoza is a very big family. It's doing very well. And they kept Jewish. And not only that, you have grown up with the desire to give back to society, but also to stand up proudly for your Jewish values. Give us a little bit about that.
So I don't think there's any consistency. The point is, there's not a fight between these two issues. Political perspectives, my values-based perspectives, and my Jewish perspectives all align. There is no fight between them. It's not as if I'm going, Jewishly I'm thinking this, but Britishly I'm thinking that, and how do I reconcile the two? I think the reality is, if you look at Britain as a society, it is based fundamentally on Judeo-Christian values. That is the basis of what we have as a nation established. It's what made Britain great.
Mm-hmm.
An understanding of that and sort of the connectivity to the past, and taking those law codes, taking those moral ideas, transforming them into modern day societies. I think we have a very good example, and in much of the West the same is true as well. But Britain, I think, has been a particularly good example because it hasn't been aggressive about it. The British way has always been, we get along with each other, we, have a certain sense of this or that. We don't tend to ram it down your throat because that's not how it works. And so, just as with, you don't want necessarily religion rammed down your throat, that's not something you want. I've always found you come to things in your own way, you find a balance within yourself as to what you think is important in your own personal views and in your public views as well. The same thing tends to happen. So for me, there's never been a conflict. And I think it's interesting. If you look at the Jewish community as an example of integration into the UK, I think they've been brilliant over the centuries of doing that. Jews came with the idea, look, we're not looking to convert Britain to Judaism. That's not going to happen here. We're not looking to carve out special dispensations or in that way. We want to get on with everyone else and be part of it. Yes, we'll have our own distinct sort of religious identity, but we're going to be proud Britons. We're going to serve in the army. We're going to, sort of work in the professions. We're going to help in the hospitals. We're going to do what everyone else does. We'll just do it with a Jewish head on rather than a different way. But
I think that's essential. That's a very important idea to get out to the society, to understand how well Jews have actually integrated into society over here and how well they're contributing, of course, and benefiting, and how grateful they are for the country that we live in.
Exactly. I mean, Rabbi Abraham Levy, who was the long-term leader of our community, had a great saying. He said, Britain has been good to the Jews, but the Jews have been good to Britain as well. Because think of the number of Jews who have, kind of done all these things for the country, have worked and brought innovations, enterprise, think of the great retail stores, the businesses, the lawyers, judges, the politicians, the doctors, and in local communities at far less levels as well. This is not just a top-up thing. This is also bottom-down, people getting involved, from the lowest to the highest, being engaged in their local communities and making a change and transformation.
And tell me, a young boy or girl that's growing up here in London, what kind of message can you give to them? They're thinking a little bit about politics, not politics. does it really work? Does it really work? Is the system working, number one? Number two, can you actually influence the system for the good? Or is it all lost that people have, can't be bothered anymore with politicians? Their vote is a waste of time. They don't really believe in it.
Does politics work? Yes, is the answer. Because how do you achieve systemic change in a society in a Western liberal democracy? You can only do it through politics.
Give us an example.
Well, an example.
Recent
Well,
example.
what I'm talking about that is, if you look at legislation, the way to change things is you put legislation in, the government does something or Parliament does something, and then you get the transformation. It can be large or small, in that setup. That's how you get things changed. Ultimately, even protest, the whole point of protest in this country is to get things changed at the parliamentary governmental level, which is an acknowledgement, therefore, that politics ultimately does work. Now, does that mean the system is working? That's a different story. And I think, we are seeing, some of the problems within the political system, which is now, kind of sending very strange results out when you're seeing elections and people going, well, we tried that lot, they didn't work, this lot isn't working either, maybe that, the third lot will be the best, outcome. I think people are looking now, aren't they, for answers. They're looking for answers for, a sense of a world that is in an uneasy place right now. And if we look at the world, and this is the other interesting part, we are now in a totally different era to the era from, say, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when we were looking, it was all such, smooth sailing. It was the end of history. It was the inevitable rise of liberal democracy worldwide. The West would be the preeminent power forever.
Globalization.
All these things, look normal. And now we're in a very uncertain place. All the things we thought we knew have been turned on their heads. Ancient enemies have re-emerged, new enemies have appeared, the system is breaking, and people are looking for answers.
The Jewish view is, the reason is because God is showing his face. He's saying, don't believe only in yourselves, because if you just believe in yourselves, society, there's a turnaround. So that's why the world is round. Things go up, things go down. But Vayishman Yishuv Vayivad, it says in Parshat Ha'azinu that the Am Yisrael, they became full and fat. And when you become full and fat and everything's going rosy for you, then you kick. They kick God. We don't need God. So God sometimes puts things upside down and shows us actually this guy's not amazing. This guy's not amazing. He's in charge. Lev melachim biyad Hashem. It says like the heart of the kings is in God's mind, as we can see. Sometimes people say, okay, this president's going to be good. And then you see he might not be good. It's prime minister, etc. But we can only try. We pray, obviously, that everybody is good, but we can only try. But now, if you have somebody that's young and they look to you and they say, listen, is it worth my while going for this? What is your message to them?
And the answer is definitely yes, because individuals can make a big difference, and people who never thought they could make a difference.
Do you have any personal ideas, examples?
My organisation, the Henry Jackson Society, would not have existed if me and a few others had not decided at one crazy point to go, oh, we really feel strongly about these ideas, let's turn it into a think tank that can influence policy, basically. And if we as 5 or 6 individuals hadn't done that, it would never have existed. And over the last 20 years, 20 years probably, we can show you examples in legislation around terrorism, around extremism, which we have influenced the government on. We have seen big changes, like, for example, the removal of Huawei from the 5G network in the UK, which occurred because of a big campaign we ran and probably wouldn't have happened without us. And, many other points. I mean, I've annoyed Russia and Iran so much that they've sanctioned me. So there's a great... So again, it shows that the things we're doing have had an impact in that way. Of course you can make an impact. You've just got to believe. You've got to believe you can make that impact, and you've got to then understand the system. You can't make an impact if you go into the system railing about breaking the system. It's all, you're going to change it fundamentally. You're not going to change this. The British system's been around for a long time. You've got to understand how to work within it to achieve sometimes radical ends. And there are great examples of that. At least probably the best example of that was Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher had very radical ideas that would, probably not have been considered either 10 years before or 10 years after, had there not been that particular moment where she was able to seize the opportunity and her ideas in the moment matched. But there was one crucial element. She had to have the personality and the belief that she could and would make change was fundamental in this country. And so that tells you that individuals can certainly make a difference. I mean, circumstances have to match, but, you've got the ability to do it. So any young person out there who wants to make a difference, find the place you feel you can actually do something. Don't ignore it. run with that, and then be the person who actually works towards the change you want to make in society.
I think that's fantastic. And tell me, trials and tribulations, obviously, along your path to gaining to set it up, the Henry Jackson Society, to be part of the political system. Do you have anything in mind that was a difficult moment in your life where you had to decide or you needed to overcome certain difficulties in order to get to where you are?
The joke is that normally think tanks are started by a group of rich people come together to do things. Well, here a group of poor people came together to start something. But in terms of, and clearly we were rich in ideas, because 20 years later we've survived. So this is a whole bunch prospered. So that is, important. But look, the reality was, at numerous points in a small business's life, and it's relevant not simply to a think tank, but to any organisation, you are touch and go on whether you're actually going to be able to make it the next day with the door still open, essentially. So, there are points when you've gone, wow, well, this is an interesting moment, or we're facing, financial oblivion here, or this donor didn't, sort of come through with that, or...
And how do you react at that moment?
To be calm. The first, keep calm and carry on, because the worst thing you can do is lose your head, okay? And then you've got to you need to be thoughtful, think about the mission, think about it. Again, it's down to belief. If you really think that what you're doing is valuable and worthwhile, you will find people, or the plan will be there, the people will come to you, and you will have that moment. And that, I think, is the other thing. Don't ever lose confidence in your beliefs and ideas. If you know they're the right ones, stick with them. And then if it's meant to be, normally it's meant to be, then it will happen. And sometimes in most unusual ways. You will be somewhere. It could be that I walk out here, I bump into someone in the street, he drops his card, I realise he's a great, sort of person to meet, and we go from there. It's that random.
Follow the next Lessons for Life podcast to find out whether they actually happened.
Well, exactly. Yeah. But this of course comes down to the great question: is life random or is it planned? And here's your,
God is everywhere.
Exactly.
And of course, God is giving us He's opening us the doors. Something very interesting when it comes to the Torah perspective. They ask in the rabbis which is the most prominent pasuk in the Torah. So one rabbi said it's Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. One of the rabbis comes up with something very interesting. He says, Olat Haboker, Asher Olat HaTamid. It's a pasuk that talks about the daily sacrifice. And all the rabbis are, why is that the most important? And the idea is what you just mentioned. If you're consistent, every day there was a sacrifice in the morning and in the afternoon. There was a constant sacrifice in the temple. If you're consistent, you will succeed. But God will chuck stuff at you in the meantime. There'll be trials and tribulations, and I like the idea of obviously being calm and collective about making the decisions and pulling through. So that's really fantastic, and we can see the outcome in front of us, because obviously you've had a massive impact on British Jewry. Where do you think you want to go going forwards? What kind of achievements what's left to achieve?
Well, sadly, I thought I could retire after 20 years because the world would be solved. There'd be, the lion had was meant to.
Did you really think you'd solve that?
No. But no, I think the situation is, it's interesting. We are, I hate to say it's more of the same, but it's more of the same. If you look at the challenges in the world today, as far as we see it, from the perspective of the Henry Jackson Society, you've got here assaults on freedom, okay, at home and abroad. Abroad, you have, countries like Russia, China, Iran, who threaten freedom and who are doing their best to extinguish it. They have terrorist, obviously, entities attached to them who are doing the same things. These are people who are directly threatening the free world. These are, and therefore our way of life in that sense as well. And domestically, we have seen, have we not, in the last few years, tremendous threats to freedom here. Freedom of speech, extremism, radicalization, terrorism, the sort of, rampant wokery that makes, thought crimes more important, it would seem, than real crimes in this sort of setup. That's not the basis of, what the West is. That's not the basis of what, sort of Jewish law is either. It's not based on sort of, cracking down on these things. And I've always felt that, and I know that they argue both ways, but I've always felt that actually there's tremendous freedom embodied in the Jewish experience. And after all, we have a whole festival, Pesach, that is, of course, dedicated to freedom, the idea of freedom and the importance of it, and what it means to be free. Freedom has responsibilities as well. It's not simply we're going to go out and do what we want thing. There are responsibilities around that. That through the mitzvot and things like that. But
Sfirat HaOmer, get free in Pesach, but then
right.
It's another 50 days.
In order.
It's linked to Shavuot.
Correct.
That's real freedom. There's freedom, physical freedom, and then there's mental freedom.
And there's mental freedom.
Torah. That
But
was
as a
yeah.
but as a society here, are we now sacrificing freedom? Is that the case? I think we probably are. So the question, therefore, is it's about pushing back on that. And the real question is, if we look back on, or look forward, I should say, to the next, say, 25, 30 years, are our futures going to be better or worse than our past? That's the question.
Do you see us here in Britain in the next 25 years? Because a lot of young people are leaving. A lot of the wealthy people have already left. A lot of businesses are moving out. It's a tough time at the moment, but I know that obviously there's downturns and upturns, but I don't think in my experience as a rabbi, I'm looking around and hearing different perspectives from many different people, from businessmen to doctors to nurses. I don't think I've ever hit such a downturn in Britain for a Jew, number one, and for any person because of the lack of economics that are going on over here at the moment. What is your perspective as a Jew? What would you advise?
So I like the fact you actually did mention everyone as well as the Jews, because I think it is a mistake to look at this as a Jewish issue.
Definitely everyone. It's the cost of life crisis that's going up.
So, and it's about the future of the country and whether we think the country's broken or not, whether we think, issues like immigration are going to be resolved. Whether we think
you said, but when it comes to politics, you had conservatives, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on who you vote, we have different listeners. We're tweeting to everyone, obviously. Yeah. Conservatives lost the election big time. Yeah, Labour took over, and already within a short period of time, it looks like reform is coming. People don't know who to choose, what to choose, and the reason is nobody's happy. And to be honest with you, they didn't really inherit such a great economy and government because it was a big mess since Brexit. People and the whole world is going into a deglobalization. So people are unhappy. The question is, is Britain going to pull up their socks?
Yeah.
Is this a place you'd like to live in 20, 25 years? Because if you were in Dubai right now, it's a place that you would like to live in 5 years, 10 years, because they've got tax incentives, they're building, they've got innovation. Saudi Arabia are coming up with all this innovation. Trump is going to visit all these places. There's a whole big thing over there. But Britain, what do we have to sell? What do we have to gain being over here?
Well, we have plenty to go. We've plenty to sell as a country in that way. But the key to it is, and I think there is an element for Jews, which is anti-Semitism, the rise of anti-Semitism, or the return of it, however you want to look at it. That is a question that obviously, Jews feel particularly. But I will say this, it is also a symptom for the whole country to be concerned about. If Britain it becomes an anti-Semitic place, I can assure you, it will not simply be the Jews.
Has it become?
In this. I wouldn't say that Britain's become an anti-Semitic place. I would say anti-Semitism has increased in Britain, absolutely. But has Britain become an anti-Semitic place? Absolutely not. And I would say this because it is very dangerous to just go on what you see on social media and what you see on, in your snatched conversations in your neighbours.
Problem is, because so many people are constantly on social media, 5 hours on your phone, 7 hours, look at the phone, and it's constantly popping up. It's not like the olden days where you had a TV in BBC One, 2, and then you had ITV, and it's constantly being pushed at the younger generation.
Yes.
And my fear is they're the younger generation, they're coming through as the future doctors, nurses, lawyers, etc., politicians. That is influencing them. That is probably the biggest influencer in the generation. And that's what's happening on a constant basis. So how are we preparing ourselves 5 years, 10 years down the road for the next generation, which is going to come through on a constant basis, being hit by anti-Semitic, and the comments that people write for these posts that are put on there are even worse, and they get liked by thousands of people.
Well, we have an example of Kanye West, who has more Twitter followers or whatever it is, Instagram followers than there are Jews in the world, and you can see the problem. Look, but again, it's not just about the Jews, okay? We have to just make this important point. I can guarantee you that an anti-Semite is going to have a whole set of other views that are going to be anti-British or anti-other minorities in Britain or whatever it might be in this way that makes it a fundamentally un-British creed. And we've seen already that when the British people are roused on a subject like that, they do tend to, react slowly, but it reacts. So a good example is Jeremy Corbyn. So all the anti-Semitism in the Labour Party in that period played very badly for Jeremy Corbyn in that election. It wasn't the determinant. I don't think anyone, in rural Britain went, "Oh, I'm not voting for him because he's an anti-Semite," or "I think he's an anti-Semite." I think they went. There's all this sort of issue around him. He seems to be very un-British in many different ways in his views on all these things, and the anti-Semitism part is one of it.
Mhm.
He's soft on it. He says it's not an anti-Semite, but he seems to be encouraging it. So we don't like that. It's part of a broad milieu. So the real question we're asking is, will Britain pull out and funk? Not will, say British Jews per se do that. And that answer is, we don't know. That's a reality. So here's the interesting bit. Why don't we know? Well, we don't know if any of the political parties are going to be able to pull us out of there. Who's the leader who's going to be the Margaret Thatcher of this era? Who's going to say, people forget now because we're too young, but people in the 1970s thought Britain was fundamentally finished. There were strikes every which way. There was a 3-day energy situation. You had to have blackouts in Britain. The country was bankrupt and had to go to the IMF for a loan. Okay, things that you wouldn't, we think economics bad now are nothing compared to then, that way. And yet, within 10 years, Britain was booming again. Why? Because someone came forth with ideas and turned the country around. So, it's in the balance. But we know the world is always in the balance as well. One good deed can tip the balance. So, from that perspective, we have to say the same thing in terms of politics. One idea, one person saying, I'm going to do something different, can tip the balance the right way. So what the most important thing to do is not to leave and go, it's done, it's finished. It's to go, you know what? Until it's over, I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight because I may be the difference in that battle. I'm going to be the person who's going to turn it around one step of the way and restore this country to the position it can certainly be at, which is a very powerful country with great views domestically, internationally, and which can still make a difference there.
This is very, very, very fundamental words, I think, and a great idea for all our viewers and listeners to understand over here. It's incredible. We must always believe that there is a future, and for the younger generations coming through, to encourage them to participate in society. When you look in the Torah, obviously you grew up, with the ideas of the Torah and Judaism. Is there anything that's given you inspiration from within the Torah that has propelled you to where you are, or that has enabled you to overcome certain situations?
It's interesting because you don't know, in a sense, what is embedded within your consciousness, as it were, from the very fact that you believe and that you're part of this whole tradition. I've never gotten at one particular moment. I recall the case of Moshe here, or it was this sort of moment.
It's about time that you do.
But
about time you do.
This is interesting. But what's interesting is you can easily find analogies and look at things in that sort of way. So, for example, this is not my example, I'm giving an example. So Donald Trump, right? You're going to go, where's he going with this? So Donald Trump, okay, you can argue that Donald Trump is like Aharon HaKohen. Why? Okay, because one of the things that Donald Trump is clearly motivated by is the idea of peace. Okay, what do they say about Aharon?
Ohev Shalom,
Rodef Shalom.
He loved peace and
he chased it, exactly. So is Donald Trump actually chasing peace with all the things he's doing? Is that because he loves this idea and this concept? But this is my point. The point is that a lot of the behaviours you see in politicians in the West are grounded in those ideas of the Torah, because it has become part of our society and part of our understanding to go through that. So, you can start detangling all the trends and go, actually, I can see what this person was doing, what that person was doing. It is minded by this idea or by that idea. So the reality is, if we stay true to the ideals of our Western civilization, which are, again, largely Judeo-Christian ones, then you're intertwining at every given moment. And you have the confidence to look at your history, to look at the belief systems that inspired our societies, and to go, they've been right for 5,000 years, they're still going to be right in 5,000 years' time.
And have you ever come across, you're on BBC, etc. When it comes to these kind of TV networks, such as the BBC,
mm-hmm.
Have you ever experienced any interesting stories where there's been anti-Semitism, or you can feel that there's a big political way against the Jews in any way?
So, what do you mean in terms of the way the stories are constructed?
Yes.
Well, I think
the questions that are asked of you, pointing you in a certain direction in order to corner you and finish you off, kind of thing, rather than being apolitical.
Oh, well, there's always bias in journalism. I mean, the idea that, look, journalists long cease to be neutral observers in these things. The BBC doesn't have a bias. copiously chronicled. There have been two big reports about BBC bias just about the Gaza conflict, and in fact, we have also done reports on elements of what's gone on in Gaza that have not been reported by the press. We've clearly shown the press has an agenda.
But yet you get protests on the other side saying that they're pro-Israel.
Absolutely, because the other side will go, oh, you're not taking our point of view, etc. But what you have to do is be objective and look at, if you actually, sort of map the perspectives. The other side is saying Israel's a genocidal state, and if the BBC doesn't say that, then it's clearly pro-Israel in that way. But that's not the correct way to look at it, because Israel is not a genocidal state. There is no, legal bar that Israel's crossed. Yeah, you can say it's genocidal. That's just your view. There's no legal form of genocide that Israel's crossed. Not even moral form of genocide that Israel's crossed. So if you're taking that view, you're setting the stall in the wrong place. You can't say that. You've got to take it back to the reality. Now, if you start from unreality, then sure, you're going to find bias because it's because you're in unreality, not because the BBC is actually biased in that way. But in this case, what we're, if you're looking at this example of the conflict, looking at where the BBC's been on this, they have been ignoring the reality of Hamas shields, Hamas tunnels, Hamas using civilian infrastructure in this sort of way. They ignore all that, simply talk about, why the Israelis are killing civilians.
Can you not monitor? Because sometimes I find that the questions that are being asked exactly push in a certain direction. The questions that are asked are basically questions where the interviewer asks the question in a way that when they finish their sentence, it encourages a person to go in a certain direction and answer in that way, basically, which is being against Israel. And if you monitor, which you can monitor, being part of a think tank, also the amount of times that BBC, for example, put out a story about the poor Palestinians, etc., and it's on their website, about 4 or 5 stories. But when there's a murderer in the West Bank that kills a mother and injures a few other people, that's like really low down, and it's a few words that are mentioned over there. Isn't there a way of bringing them to judgment and to understand that they are actually very biased?
I would suggest that, we don't want to get into a game of, there were these number of stories. That's not the point. And look, we all know there is suffering in the Palestinian areas. We know that. But the reality of this is that you should be having a public inquiry as the BBC's conduct during this conflict, because the BBC, I think, has failed basic journalistic standards in terms of what it's done. And because of that, because there is obvious and copious evidence for that point, it would be very sensible for the government to launch a public inquiry to go, this has caused huge upset. And you can say, all right.
Is that something that you can push?
It's something that I and many others should be pushing. If one person does it, it won't work. But collectively, I think there is a moment here that we should be, now that the conflict's sort of been going on for a protracted period of time, people can go and look at it and say, right, you know what, we do need a public inquiry. We need to understand what the BBC did, and crucially, it will prevent the BBC from marking its own homework, which it likes to do, which says we'll have an internal investigation. It doesn't solve anything. The reality is the BBC is funded by taxpayers. Okay, and as a result, it needs to be accountable to taxpayers. And the appropriate way to do that would be to have a public inquiry, open up internal BBC correspondence to see what people in the BBC were saying, because that will give you a better clue as to what has actually led to maybe these stories being prioritised rather than those stories.
I think the day will come as everybody's day comes, and the world will see. The sad thing is, in the meantime, there's a lot of pushing. At the end of the day, all we want is peace, and we want there to be peace in the world. But there's all these political, far-reaching ideas that are being shoved down everybody's throat on a constant basis, and it's a sad thing, and a sad reality that when we grew up in the olden days, and we were seeing what was going on. Rwanda, we're seeing what's going on in the political world and the breaking of the wall in Berlin and the Soviet Union, etc., and the incredible journalism that happened in those days, which seemed to us as kids, 50-50, has been completely destroyed.
Yes.
And people are seeing this is black and white. This is a joke at the moment, and therefore, as a rabbi, you'll excuse me, but I don't look at the news. It's much better not to look at the news and to be positive, because I get along with Arabs and I get along with the Hindus and I get along with everybody else. But the only problem is when you got the social media shoving it into your eyes on a constant basis, and the algorithm is there for you to understand. Hate, 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 hate. They're killing you. You're killing them. This, that, the other. It's not leading in a good way. I personally think that we should go via the Australian way, where they ban social media up to the age of 16. That's something that should be pushed as a political thing, even as a Jewish thing, that no school should have social media. Will make them much more intelligent. They can actually focus on their work, and there's much more.
Parents not giving children smartphones.
But it should be government. This is what I'm saying. This is what the new government needs to be coming up with, innovative ideas that they're not bringing to the table. This is a big game changer in the world.
Well, here's your problem. I mean, social media, you see, is of course regarded now as a public good in the economic sense, i.e., we should all have access to it, and it's generally something for our benefit. Well, it turns out that the companies behind social media, it's like a drug. It's designed to hook you into it so that you spend time with it and ultimately spend money on it.
Yeah.
That's really the value of it. The more atrocities stuff they can put on, the more things they can trigger emotional reaction in your brain, the more you're going to be hooked into it. And that is why, as you're quite rightly pointing out, people have been wrestling with the idea of how do we legislate to make sure that social media, which could have benefits, ends up having that benefit and not the losses.
Whitewash ban under 16.
Yeah, it's a possibility. It's a possibility.
That's how it's
But
going.
I think we're going to head in that direction because you're seeing more and more people recognise that it is harmful to attention, it is harmful to ideas.
I think everybody recognises that the bridge is between the recognition and actually doing something about it. That's how.
And we haven't even got into AI yet.
That's how. Yeah.
Not got into AI.
Anyway, so we really, really have learnt a lot today. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Alan Mendoza. It's been a pleasure. We will be following you and the Henry Jackson Society, as well as all your incredible work. And you've given us food for thought. We wish you a great week ahead. Thank you.
You as well. Thank you.